Our next session in day 3, where we are talking about the future of money, is looking at an aspect that's so important for sustainability, and that is the area of philanthropy. So our next speaker is Laurence Lien, and he will be examining the future of money through the lens of philanthropy with his session titled Philanthropy as a Catalyst for Change. Now, Laurence is the co-chair of the Lien and CEO of the Asia Philanthropy Circle, which is a membership-based platform for exchange, learning, and collaboration. And he's also the chairman of his family's foundation, the Lien Foundation, which is well regarded for its forward-thinking and radical approach in the fields of education, elder care, and the environment. This includes the humanitarian arm of the foundation, Lien Aid, which supports sustainable access to clean water and sanitation for Asia's poor. Laurence shares his views on philanthropy, the importance of systemic intervention, the focus of the Asia Philanthropy Circle, and he gives some great examples of projects that demonstrates the power of collaboration in philanthropy. He also has a very important message, and that is roll up your sleeves. You cannot just talk about it or throw money at a solution. You have to get involved. Good morning, Laurence. It's wonderful to have you here with us today, and thank you for agreeing to join us in the Inspired Conference. In your
Thank
session,
you for having me.
it's a big pleasure. We are looking at philanthropy as a catalyst for changing the world. I think I suppose as a philanthropist, you have a big vision, right? So maybe we should start by asking, how would you define philanthropy? And, you know, is it charity? Some people might say it's charity, but what is your view of philanthropy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think people know this, that if you break up the word philanthropy into the root words, that it just means love of humankind. And so in that sense, it's similar to charity, right? The motivation of doing good is the love of our fellow human beings. But I guess the difference between philanthropy and charity is this, that philanthropy has evolved to mean an approach that is much more engaged and strategic. And by that I mean impact of the actions that you fund and you invest in. So philanthropy has become more about problem solving, particularly issues that have long-term implications that are a little bit more complex, looking at root causes, what causes the issues, and really what we consider systems-wide problems. And philanthropists want to make a difference in solving these issues. So charity tends to be a little bit more short-term, palliative. You need both, right? When someone is drowning, you don't say, why is the person drowning, and ponder about that while the person is drowning. Right? You save the person. But if you think about it a bit more systemically, after you save the person, you want to ask yourself, is there something about the safety, in this area that causes people to fall into the river, and causes drowning or falls into the sea, and you try to solve that, right? Now that's more philanthropy. But you still need charity if people are suffering, they have disease, they can't feed themselves. You want to be able to plug those gaps immediately. But if you don't solve the underlying root issues, those problems will just keep on recurring and recurring, and no amount of money is enough to plug all those gaps. And sometimes those gaps keep on widening if you don't solve the root causes.
Well, that's a fantastic explanation, and interesting that you mention the fact that you do need both, but yes, it can just be a bottomless hole where money just keeps on disappearing if you don't look at the root cause. And would you say that that was part of your vision and mission for starting the Asia Philanthropy Circle, APC? I know that you've got extensive background in the government sector, and uh, how or what was it that inspired you to create this organization?
Mhm. Well, it didn't just start out of nothing, right? I mean, it first started many years ago when, uh, almost 20 years ago, when I was involved in my own family's foundation. I was asked to join my family's foundation board, the Lien Foundation, and I started really enjoying the work, you know, and I mean, we changed from what you call a very scattershot um, spray and pray foundation. I think that's what you call foundations that just write checks and and don't do very much. Into something very different in from around 2005 onwards. Um, really investing in new models, experimenting, taking risks, and making a difference. So I took that experience and decided that why don't I start doing this sort of work at a national level. So that I was in government then, and I was enjoying my stint in government. But in government, especially in Singapore, there are lots of good people. If you leave, nobody is going to miss you. Right? Whereas I think in the philanthropy world, people very few people are in this space, particularly in Asia and including Singapore. And any added person can make much more of a difference. So I came out full time to work on volunteerism and philanthropy. I was the CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, but that was focused on Singapore. I did that for 6 years and again enjoyed that and felt I made a difference. But Singapore is pretty well taken care of. I've always wanted to do something for the region. And so that happened in 2014, 2015, when a group of us decided, let's start a platform that supports the region. And what we were observing was that a lot of philanthropists in the region, they're trying to create impact, but they felt they weren't hitting the target, right? They weren't bringing about enough change. And if you observe what they were doing, a lot of them were reinventing the wheel, making the same mistakes, not really tackling problems at scale, working in isolation. We felt that what we needed was a platform to flow best practices across the region, to bring philanthropists together, to learn from one another, and to collaborate, to work together on common problems. So we set up Asia Philanthropy Circle, which was launched in 2015, to bring about really, back to the definition of philanthropy, change, in the way that we deal with complex social issues. So our mission is we want to accelerate, the private action, and in this case, local philanthropic actors for the public good, by addressing really systemic challenges through collaborative philanthropy. We feel very strongly that by working together, we can all adopt the best practices and solve problems at scale.
That's actually an approach that not only in philanthropy, but a broader approach that would help solve problems in the world, and that reflects SDG 17, the United Nations Sustainability Goal 17, that is about meaningful partnerships. So it's your APC actually gives voice to that aspiration, or is, really lives that aspiration of the United Nations as well. Now, I'm quite interested to know, and I'm sure our viewers will be interested to know, whether the APC only involves parties from Asia, and whether you are only looking at solving issues in Asia and how that would contribute to serving global or more regional, is it more regional or do you also have global aspiration?
Yes, uh, Asia Philanthropy Circle does have an Asian focus, and a few reasons for that. One is that we felt that um, local actors, local philanthropic actors needed to step up and needed to be enabled, and that even big global issues, if you take some of the big global issues like climate change, a lot of the funding within Asia for those big issues are from outside Asia. So we do think local actors needed to step up. But on top of that, I think the type of solutions that we adopt for Asia needs to be different because the context is different. We need adaptation, we need localization. Um, so for example, unlike say doing grant making in the US or Europe, you have a lot of well-established NGOs on the ground. You don't have as much of that in Asia. So you need to help build up capacity in these local implementing partners. There's a lot of distrust, um, in Asia, among foundations themselves, or between foundations and NGOs, between foundations and governments, and so on. So you need to work in a way that builds trust and that bridges across the multiple stakeholders. And on top of that, I think that you have a lot of family sort of driven companies that function a little bit different from like the corporates, the big MNCs, in the West. So again, you have to evolve a way of doing things that that would fulfill, I guess, family desires as well as impact on the ground. So we make no apologies that we do focus on Asia, solving issues within Asia, because Asia has got a very large population, even if the focus of the world might be in places like Africa. But we do work with international players, because when you source for inspiration, for suitable models for what works, you don't just look within Asia. I mean, you look globally and see what others are doing. And we do leverage on funding, on co-funding, because that helps set up new initiatives. For example, APC itself works with the Power of Nutrition, which is based in the UK, and we started an anti-stunting effort, in Indonesia, which also has the funding from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, from Australia. We are also starting a new project to look at cross-border flows of funds and how we can facilitate that has been being funded by Gates Foundation, working with Asia Foundation. So where it makes sense, yes, we want to leverage on international players, because the learning should be from anywhere, even though when we start doing the work, it needs to be adapted for the local context. And in time to come, we can find new, I guess, Asian narratives to inspire Asian philanthropists to do even more.
That makes a lot of sense. I think so many people forget the value of trust and how important that is in the work that you do, as even in NGOs or any kinds of community work. It takes time to establish a trust relationship, and having a deeper understanding of the culture and the local traditions really makes a difference, because there is no cookie cutter solutions, especially when you work with people, right? Now, Laurence, how do you see the role of philanthropy in closing the poverty gap and in terms of the future of money?
I guess we're all very concerned about this because inequality is really growing. And with COVID, I think it will grow even more. There will be winners and losers from COVID, and winners would include probably many large companies, not in the devastated sectors like aviation and tourism, but in many other industries, it will be the big companies that will survive and gain market share. And the small guys, the SMEs, would suffer, and the low income would suffer even more. So we have to be very worried about this. But if you look at the amount of philanthropy in the world, it's still nothing to compared to the size of the work before us, right? The largest foundation in the world is the Gates Foundation, and they gave out like 5 to 6 billion US dollars a year, and that's like a tiny fraction of any government's budget, right? So you total up all the philanthropy is not going to, and give it all away, it's not going to make a huge difference, right? So I do believe that philanthropy needs to work again at the systems level, go to the cause of inequality, the causes of poverty, whether it's the education system that is not providing the skills that young people need, or it's the way that jobs are created and being matched are not good enough, the opportunities are not going to the right people, or creating new sustainable businesses. I think philanthropy needs to work at that level, including policy advocacy, advocating for governments to invest in this, because at the end of the day, government with its ability to tax has got a lot more impact on addressing poverty than all the philanthropists in the world. But of course, we do need to work downstream and just give money away. I think lots of people hang on too much to the wealth. In Asia, I think we are even it's even more serious because we want to pass on inheritance and wealth down the generation, pass businesses down to our children. That is less so in a place like the US, where you want your children to be independent and to make their own wealth. So I think families in Asia will start realizing that giving your kids too much is not good for them. Right? They will completely spoil them, and they might turn out to be much more. You preserve human capital within the family, I think, by giving more away.
That's a very interesting view. I think that's it makes me wonder. Are there methods that that can convince the more wealthy to share their resources for philanthropic causes? Is there a line that we draw between giving things willingly or being more coerced into doing this? Some people will say, oh, but they increase taxes, or there must be a mechanism that gets people to contribute. What do you feel about? How do you feel about that?
I think it needs to be a mixture of things. I think taxes need to be raised. That's going to be inevitable, given the huge government debt that's skyrocketing now. I think it's inevitable that taxes will be raised on those with more wealth and higher income. But you can't overdo that. That might crash, some businesses, or reduce the incentive to grow. So some of it has to be voluntary, and I guess some of it is about just putting across, case studies to show, hey, it makes sense to give, not just for the sake of not spoiling your kids, but it's good for you. I mean, people who give are happier, right?
And would you,
Um,
I suppose, sorry, there's a case for saying that if you give something voluntary and because it comes
yeah,
from your heart and you have that
that's right.
from ambition, you will also be more engaged and willing to, put some effort into ensuring that what you do has impact,
Yeah,
other than just being
absolutely.
forced.
Yes, I mean, if you are forced to give, that's why I think there is a limit to just raising taxes, because you just give reluctant. I mean, nobody likes paying more taxes, right? Because particularly if you live in countries where you don't think much of the government, you want to do it yourself. But there's something in that personal approach, where again, it's not just about the money, right? As I mentioned, it's about problem solving and engage. And on top of that, it's about engaging with others whom you don't encounter most of your life, and building that friendship, that relationship, and that empathy for people that who are just so much more disadvantaged than you, and that
I think,
is good for society, right?
yeah.
That building that what they call bridging social capital.
And I think there've been quite a few very large scale studies. I know I recall one from Harvard that was released that focuses on what makes you really happy.
Hmm.
And true happiness comes from relationships, from feeling giving to others and feeling that you've really contributed, and I think that is where the value lies because um, you mentioned, families giving their children a lot of their, or passing on a lot of the wealth to their children. And I have that question: where's self-actualization? Where's that feeling of I worked, I achieved this thing that I really was passionate about? And I think this is where philanthropy really has that, that potential to bring about that real happiness but we talked about impact. We mentioned the word impact. You want to make change. You want to have a systemic impact or an impact on a large on the roots of the problem. But how would you, in terms of philanthropy, measure impact? And how do you
Um,
think about
okay,
impact?
yeah, yeah. That's tough. I mean, we're all grappling with this because uh, impact in the financial sector is very simple. It's all about whether you make financial returns, and there's only one set of metrics. It's profitability, um, and the measurement is dollars, right? It's just money. Impact in the social space is uh, multi-layered, right? And it really depends on the objectives that you want, and there are short-term and long-term objectives. Uh, um, well, to really simplify is, if you have a particular social goal, are you meeting it? Uh, are the beneficiaries that you want, who to benefit from your actions, are their lives, really improving, and in a sustainable way? People don't forget about that. They might improve in the short term when you're acting, when you're intervening, but when you leave, will things go back to normal or become even worse when uh, or completely unravel when you leave? It must be sustainable. So there must be that sense of ownership also, by the people that you're trying to impact. So I mean, it's different for for different areas. So it really depends on uh, what you're trying to achieve. Um, So maybe it's easier to take an example. The Lien Foundation, I mean, we have been working, we've got a program called the Circle of Care, working with children in kindergartens, right, and childcare centers. So in the early childhood education space. And we're working with the lowest, not just the lowest income, the highest risk kids, kids who are not turning up in school, in the kindergarten, and the absenteeism rate is could be as high as 70%.
Wow.
Right? And this is in Singapore. Of course, it's a very few numbers, but as you can appreciate, Singapore is quite an unequal society. So if you are in a lower income, you tend to come from a family that's pretty multi-stressed, right? You've got many issues. You might be, parents are holding two jobs, one parent might be in prison, and so on. And then there's no one really to take care of these young kids. And usually these families also have quite a few kids, right? So, I mean, the first thing that you want to do is to make sure that the kid, starts going to school. But that's not so simple. If you call the parents and the parents are nowhere to be found. So we invest in social workers. We make social workers be a full-time staff of these kindergartens, and they anchor the work, the wraparound work that needs to take place. Going into the families, reaching out to them, solving all the different issues that these families might have. And so you have to measure all those activities that you do. What does a social worker do? To help families. But the ultimate impact, you never lose sight of it, is does the kid start going to school? And so we measure that, the absenteeism rate. We measure at the end of it whether the child is school ready when the child goes to primary 1, and we have indicators for that. And we also want to see that the parents are turning up in school, so they are starting to be more engaged, because then you can start the virtuous cycle of parents supporting the child's education at home, because remember, the child's only spending like 4 hours in the school environment during the school term. He spends most of his time at home, or she. So the parents need to support the learning, so you need to measure that. So it's not so it's multifaceted, as you can imagine. It's not just one indicator. You can't just reduce it to a dollar number, for example, in terms of benefit.
And what you're describing as well is, again, reinforcing the need for partnerships and for like approaching a situation like what your focus is from so many different angles, involving many stakeholders, and there's not just one solution. So to think that just one organization can achieve that on their own, it's not going to be sustainable or have that deep impact that you could think of when you think about your community of philanthropists, and involving a wide range of people. And we see that so often, that NGOs or individuals try to address a problem by just looking at one aspect of it and measure therefore, can you really say that they've had impact, or was it just, as you mentioned earlier, a spray and pray
approach?
solution?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I often say that, in philanthropy, you're dealing with the most complex challenges, because if the solution was easy enough, governments or businesses would have solved it, right? But you're usually left with some of the toughest challenges. So the example that I gave, is in the early years of nation building, Singapore just had to build, more and more kindergartens, and kids would just go, because previously they didn't have the opportunity, but now they had. But when all those are built, it's not the technical challenge anymore of just building more kindergartens. It's solving multiple challenges on the ground for families. Another example is the work that the Asia Philanthropy Circle we are doing in Indonesia, addressing stunting among kids under 5. It's a serious problem. 1 in 3 kids are stunted. And the reason why this is so is because a lot of people who have been working on this, tend not to be holistic enough in their approach. They solve 1 or 2 issues. But if you look at the Lancet recommendations, Lancet is an authoritative medical journal. And they say that you need a set of 11 interventions. And if only 1 or 2 or 3 of them are checked off, you're not going to have a change. So you need to work on all 11 to start with the mother, for example. The mother must not be anemic. The mother must be well fed, and taking care of herself. When a child is born, it's 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding, and as the child grows, it needs all these nutrients and vitamins and complementary feeding and so on. So it needs to be holistic, and there's no way that one party can do this alone.
No, it's impossible.
It's
11
impossible.
different interventions. I mean, that is
Yeah.
just, it just makes absolute sense that
Yeah.
there is this collaboration and that there is, so in this, as you are focusing on issues like this, you obviously are working with a lot of NGOs and a lot of service providers that help you. Now, we also know that many of these service providers, many of the NGOs are, if I can use the term, broken, in the sense of the efficiency or the way that they are run as an organization. What makes you choose, or what would you say characterizes an effective NGO? What would you, as a philanthropist who has money to invest, what makes you choose different, an organization that you would want to work with or give money to?
If you look at each country, there will be some very large and well-established NGOs. Quite often they are branches, of international NGOs, right? And so they could be quite easy to work with, in one sense, because they have all the systems in place. But they can also be challenging to work with because they have a way of doing things and they're not going to deviate too much from it. To continue the example of addressing stunting in Indonesia, it needs a few partners, right? And first, funders are a consortium, mostly Singapore-based, and we work with the Power of Nutrition, which is another intermediary that mobilizes lots of funding that's based in the UK. But the implementing partners are Save the Children Indonesia and Nutrition International Indonesia. I mean, these are big international NGOs, but in Indonesia, it's a completely local team. But they can draw on international experts in the HQ, right? And they also, it's not just them that they're working on the ground, but they're also working alongside government, trying to mobilize government because you want to build up capacity there. But we shouldn't just be working with these large international NGOs or their branches. We also need to build up community-based organizations because many of these are very much part of the community and embedded in it. And we need to develop local approaches, as I mentioned, because of the unique Asian context and have a sense of ownership of the issues. But as you say, many of them are under-resourced. I mean, in Southeast Asia, for example, I mean, in the early days, a lot of them receive international funding, but that is being reduced because many of these countries are considered to be graduating, out of the low income ranks. So philanthropists do, need to invest in these NGOs to build up capacity, to build up an ecosystem. Um, and I mean, for example, I mean, one of our initiators, uh, is on peace building uh, in Indonesia, and one of our members is funding that initiative. And we're working with quite a local community-based organization. And so this APC. And we don't just give them money. I mean, we have to advise them on governance, for example, how to do, uh, um, how to present their books, how to ensure no conflicts of interest, how to, well, do proper audits, of their accounts and their internal processes and so on. Because I mean, they don't have a lot of models on how to run things, right? People don't teach, and then as funders, we can help them do that, so that and these are really good people running the organization, but you don't want them to trip up because they didn't get the governance right, they didn't get the systems right, and you need that also for them to be able to scale. So that's very much part of the work, um, and uh, one caution is that you don't necessarily need to find something that's completely well run from A to Z and then decide to fund them, right? Because you're going to have very few to fund. I think the more important thing is when you assess an NGO, is you really have to assess the person and people running it. That's the most important. Do you trust this person? Do you have confidence that this person is willing to learn, has got a sense of mission, purpose? Assess some of the work and the track record, but don't expect the NGOs to be able to check off every single thing. You end up not giving a lot of NGOs a chance. But as you don't need to give a lot to such NGOs. Give them something, help build them up alongside them as an advisor, and then as you get more comfortable, you can enlarge the funding.
So
Yeah.
what you're sharing is that it's the two responsibilities here. On the one hand, from the side of the NGO, to be very clear about their mission, about their communication. But as you also mentioned, a lot of the time, it's really good folks with passion for people and fantastic intent, but they just lack that organizational knowledge or skill to make that the NGO become sustainable. And therefore, it seems as if it's sometimes very hands-on for you to, as if there's a lot of work from your side. It's not just a question of a fund that you provide. How hands-on would you say are all your projects, or do you have different levels of engagement and involvement in the projects?
It's different levels, So if it's quite an established NGO, even an established local NGO, you don't have to invest as much of your own time to build it up. But if it's a smaller, sort of more local, community-based organization that needs work, yes, you might have to invest a fair bit of time. But this is where collaboration is useful, very useful, right? If you work together, as a collective, right, you can, be in a better position to support more NGOs. So you spread out the work of supporting these NGOs. It's not each one going in, and doing things in isolation. So for example, I mean, if 5 of us, are working with 5 organizations, and we each want to fund them, one approach would be that we each help 5 organizations, right, on different things, because we all have different strengths, right? Would it not be better if we kind of focus on one? If we need help on any particular area, we'll call on somebody else, in the collective to give inputs as and when that's needed. But you share the work, as a collective. Uh, then it's more manageable. Otherwise, that's right. I mean, it's really, it can be very resource intensive. But the hope is that once you start growing it, being able to grow that organization, the impact will be disproportionately large compared to the effort that you put in the early years.
But Laurence, and I mean that is exactly why I believe that this model that you have with your APC is really something that could be of other philanthropists or organizations could learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm just
Let me just say one quick thing. I mean, sometimes you do need to start up new NGOs, right? It's not about building up because they may not exist. So you'll be familiar with in Malaysia that the APC actually set up what was called Global School Leaders Malaysia, and it's now called Pemimpin, to develop school leaders to become more effective leaders, because that did not exist in the sector. And but in this case, you shortcut it by bringing a successful model from elsewhere, and we found a successful model from India, adapted, for Malaysia, and a few funders started this up as a new NGO, and now it's already in the third year, and it's got new set of funders, and it's on its pathway to sustainability.
That's a very good example of also being hands-on. Sometimes you're not going to find the existing solution, and describing this collaboration as philanthropists and organizations coming together, each one taking a different role, looking at the different strengths. Do you think that's something that many people are open to? Or do you still think that there's an ego? I don't know if I should use the word ego, but there's a preservation of my own name or my own family's name rather than being part of a bigger organization. Do you think some people, is that still a barrier to get more people into the circle?
When we started out the circle, I mean, we were quite clear that we're not reaching out to all philanthropists. Maybe just a very small minority. People give for many different reasons, right? Some more for legacy, personal reasons, ego even. And if it's really only to fulfill something in yourself or your family, or very private purpose, and it's not very much about impact, then obviously, I mean, you might not find any point in working with a group of philanthropists like ourselves at the Asia Philanthropy Circle. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense to reach out to people who are like-minded, who really care about impact and the difference that we make on the ground. Yes, we still have our own personal reasons, because I mean, I believe philanthropy, I mean, for it to be sustainable, I mean, it needs to be a confluence of two things. I mean, something that fulfills a private value, but it also produces a public good, a public value, right? As I mentioned, the best use of philanthropy is to do problem solving. Right? And some of this is really hard. So if you are not really enjoying the process, if you don't get any joy out of it, you're going to give up quite easily. So the private value is important. I mean, so you should work in areas where you're passionate about, where you enjoy going to the ground to meet the various stakeholders. So when you face the complex issues, you face frustrations, you face resistance, which is going to come, or failure. It's going to get you down, but not for long. You jump back up and say, I'll try again. So yes, what we're looking for is people who who want to really make the difference, and but we also must make sure that they're enjoying the process as well.
And I think that what you shared is also broader advice for anybody that wants to get involved in philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
It's, as you've mentioned, it must be something, an area that you really care about. You
Yeah.
must be passionate about it. You
Mm-hmm.
must care about impact. Is there any other advice that you want,
Yeah.
that you feel that you could extend to people, want to get involved in philanthropy, maybe from mistakes that you've made in the beginning, or, all the
Yeah.
years that you've been involved in this, in this endeavor?
Yeah. When I was the CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center in Singapore, I often said, volunteer first before you give money. I think going back to one of your earlier points, that you need to create that relationship, the personal encounter first, to develop the empathy and connection to the issue. And that gives you a lot of, in fact, that gives you quite often the passion, the desire, the urgency to act. So my first advice is, don't never just give money only, and write checks. Go to the ground and see things for yourself. Um, always encounter the people that you want to work with. Uh, uh, you could call them beneficiaries, users, or whatever. Develop that person, that the empathy for them. But if you want to, and once you start to do that, and start to find the areas of passion, I think a lot of mistakes that we see people making is, they feel that they have to start from scratch. You know, there's already a lot of knowledge and experience in the sector. A lot of philanthropists who would have looked at the area that you're looking at. So don't reinvent the wheel. Look to other philanthropists to learn from, and it may not be Asia Philanthropy Circle. It could be many other platforms. Community Foundation of Singapore is something that I started for Singapore to be a platform for more early stage philanthropists who want to tap into an intermediary that's got all that community knowledge in it. But it could be friends who have done a lot more in the area than you. Seek them out, right? The second mistake that I think a lot of people make, is what I call analysis paralysis, right? Which is they want, and I've come across a few people. I talked to them 10 years ago, and they said that they wanted to start their foundation. And today they still haven't started the foundation. It's like, why? It's they want to have everything figured out before they do it. There's no such thing as perfect giving, right? And I believe in just doing first and learning from it. Philanthropy follows a learning curve, and just experiments, with giving styles, with different theories of change, with maybe even different issue areas. And learn from that. I mean, these early grants, can be small. You don't have to feel that you suddenly have to make big, impactful, earth-shattering, grants, to make your mark, from get what, the word go. So I mean, I would say just start. Nothing. Try out different things. Don't make it too big, too risky, or too safe. Don't spread yourself too thin. Be a little focused, and learn along the way, and always get help. And learn from others.
And that brings me to a question around young people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How how do we encourage youth to get involved in philanthropy? Is there something that one thing that is being seen quite widely across the world is that the Gen Zs, this young generation, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, they are very passionate about the environment, they're passionate about people, they care about the future.
Mhm.
How do we mobilize this energy that of young people?
Yeah.
And how can we get them, sort of more involved in philanthropic efforts?
Yeah. So there's a misconception that you must be very rich to get involved in philanthropy. No, no, uh, that's not the way philanthropy works. In fact, I like to say, someone once said to me, if you don't give when you are poor, you never give when you're rich. Because, giving is something that just should be part of your DNA, right? You might not be able to give large amounts of money, but everyone has got 24 hours, right? No one has got more or has less. You can volunteer and work on the ground. You can speak up, right? Just like Greta Thunberg, she's not rich, but she speaks up and people listen. You can, when you go to a company, influence the company, philanthropic efforts. So many senior executives in large companies, small companies, medium companies tell me that the younger people are much more socially conscious. When they are interviewed for a job, they ask, does this company believe in corporate philanthropy, believe in CSR? What does it do? When you start asking these questions, companies realize, oh, young people are driven by these things. So it's not just about a job. They want to work for companies that has got a sense of purpose, that is connected to the community. It's not just about making money, and it influences the way that these companies are run. You can influence that as a young person, right? But always, I would say, volunteer, get engaged on the ground, and you can make contributions. And when um, you might have links to people with wealth, you can use those links, influence your parents. I remember one of my members, at APC, to Forrest. Andrew Forrest is one of the wealthiest persons, businessmen uh, in Australia, and he started Walk Free Foundation to counter, to end modern day slavery, because his daughter made him see this as an issue and made him do it. And propelled him and encouraged him to do it. So you may not have the money yourself, but you can have enormous amount of influence.
That is fantastic. I think that is a fantastic piece of advice and a takeaway from what you've shared today as well. That we have to think of philanthropy as something everybody can do. Have a sense of purpose, have a sense of meaning, and this is really why we also. It's one of our hopes that we will achieve through this inspired conference is to raise awareness, to provide a vehicle for collaboration, and just to experts like you with so much experience. Laurence, I'm going to end this with a last question. There has been, or the term radical philanthropy has been used with the Lien Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit, just as a closing remark, about the Lien Foundation and what is that actually? What does that term mean?
Well, it started quite a number of years ago, and when I got involved in the foundation, we wanted to focus on new models as a theory of change because we felt that was lacking in the Singapore landscape. So new models meaning let's experiment with new interventions, new approaches. Let's put a spotlight on things that people are not looking at. It is going back to our belief that we should look at root causes and systems levels of issues. And then the term radical philanthropy just just popped up, as a way to describe what we're doing, right? Radical in the sense that, we are very much about innovation, new approaches, thinking out the box, taking something that people are used to doing, tearing that apart and questioning all those assumptions. But radical is also about going into the root cause of the issue, and tackling that. So, I mean, and we apply that to the areas that we're interested in, which is early childhood education and early childhood development, and as well as seniors, how seniors age. We've done a lot of work in end-of-life care, in dementia care, new models of nursing home, and so on. So that's how it started. And I guess it's not just about new now, and then I think we're evolving also. Not just about, because sometimes it could be new for the sake of newness, right? It's also about systems change and systems leadership, which is the language that we are starting to use. Because it shouldn't just be, it's never just about ourselves, right? The foundation doing the work. We want to mobilize others, to be part of the action. They can be the innovators. They can be the systems entrepreneur. We want we want to engage government because they have to be part of the solution. As I mentioned, you're not going to get systems change just working alone as a foundation, as a philanthropist. If government adopts some of your programs, and we've got some examples of that, that's systems-wide implementation, right, and rollout. So yes, it still describes a lot of what we do, but I think we are also evolving.
Well, that's wonderful. It was really amazing listening to you. So many insights that you've shared with our viewers, and thank you very much, Laurence, for your time, but also for your philanthropy, for your compassion, and for the change that you are affecting in Asia. And it's really, I think at the end of the day, a model that other people, I think, can also live to. And those young philanthropists can look up to you and learn from you in the way that you are approaching this. So we really appreciate having you here and to be part of our inspired community.
Thank you, Elmarie, for having me.